On January 21st, 1997, the jury announced that it had reached a verdict in Shanda Crane's murder trial.
They were only out for like 4 or 5 hours.
Not only had the 31-year-old mother of 3 been accused of killing her parents, Lander and Bobby Spears, inside their Washington Parish, Louisiana home, she'd confessed to the crime.
She originally confessed to the detectives about 5 or 6 days after the murders. The confession was audio taped and played to the jury during her trial.
At trial, Shanda's attorneys had argued that her confession had been coerced.
I believe we were able to show the jury the real serious problems with the confession.
But had they done enough to raise reasonable doubt? It all came down to the verdict.
The jury unanimously determined that she was guilty.
Shanda's daughter, Megan, is still shocked by the verdict.
She's not that person. She's not a violent person. I believe my mom's innocent.
But in the courtroom, those who'd heard the evidence against Shanda found the prosecution's case compelling.
They were able to support every element of her confession.
Determining Shanda's guilt or innocence wasn't all the jury had to do, though. There was also her sentence, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
This was a death penalty case. I was trying to keep her from having her life taken from her by the state of Louisiana.
And this time, the decision wasn't so easy.
The family did not want the death penalty imposed, and I think that had a big bearing on the jury being deadlocked and not reaching a conclusion to impose the death penalty.
Since the jury wasn't unanimous on the death penalty, Shanda was immediately sentenced to life in prison.
In Louisiana, if you're not put to death, then it's automatic life.
With no chance of parole.
She will die in the prison.
And that's much to the disappointment of Shanda's daughter, Megan. More than 20 years after her grandparents' murder, she remains close to her mother.
I talk to her weekly. I go see my mom 2, 3, 4 times a year. She's the same person 22 years later. There's nothing different about my mom. She's still nice, outgoing, best mom ever.
Tracy Fortson was a struggling single mom.
She raised me by herself.
But she had ambitious plans.
She found a way to attend the police academy.
And off-duty, Tracy began a heated love affair with a bodybuilder named Doug Benton.
She said he makes me happy.
But then Doug was found entombed in concrete.
He was shot in the top of the head.
And the authorities would be left wondering, had Doug's checkered past come back to haunt him?
Just wanted to give him something that he'll be able to remember me by in case something was to happen to me.
That drug dealer said, "You're dead when I get out."
Or did his relationship with Tracy take a deadly turn?
Tracy was very demanding and was very jealous.
The relationship was rocky and tumultuous.
Or was an innocent woman being framed for murder?
She was shocked. We were all shocked. It was like a nightmare.
There's no way she could have done that. My mom did not kill anybody.
Madison County, Georgia, June 17th, 2000. It was Saturday afternoon when the sheriff's department received a concerned call from neighbors of 38-year-old Doug Benton.
His neighbors were worried because they kept an eye on his house when he was not there.
And according to the neighbor that called, no one had seen Doug for nearly 2 weeks.
One of his neighbors noticed the birds hadn't been cared for in some time.
He had gotten into trying to raise and sell exotic birds. It was a big investment.
And to protect his investment, Doug never left town without making sure the birds were taken care of.
He always made provision with a neighbor or family or someone to come care for his animals.
So when the neighbor realized that Doug hadn't been around for a while, he'd gone over to the house to check on the birds and made a disturbing discovery.
Those birds were dead inside the cages.
Worried that something might have happened to Doug, his neighbors had called the sheriff's department. When deputies arrived on the scene a few minutes later, they decided the neighbors' concerns were justified.
Based on the animals being deceased and out of fear for his safety, we made a decision to go into the house.
But would they find more than just dead birds?
They had to force open the back door to get into the house.
Once inside, the investigator found nothing amiss.
I don't recall noticing anything out of the ordinary in the entire house.
But did that mean he'd simply left of his own free will?
Doug's wallet, Doug's pager, Doug's cell phone, those were all missing.
Or was Doug actually a missing person? To find out, the Madison County Sheriff's Department turned to the woman Doug had been dating for the last 9 months, 35-year-old Tracy Fortson. But would she help them find Doug? Or would she only add to the mystery surrounding his disappearance? Born in 1964, Tracy Fortson grew up outdoors amid the rolling hills and farms of rural Madison County.
She liked to go fishing. She liked to ride on motorcycles. She liked to ride horses.
Anything that pertains to outdoors, Tracy enjoyed it.
Tracy loved the outdoors so much that she spent her childhood longing to be a forest ranger. But that dream was put on hold in her early 20s when she became pregnant and got married.
My mom was married after she had me. She's been married twice.
Tracy and Elisa's father were young and in love, but it wasn't enough.
She tried really hard to make that marriage work, but they just couldn't make it. They couldn't make it go.
And in 1995, not long after her first divorce, Tracy tried marriage a second time with the same result.
She loved both of her husbands. I know that. It just didn't work out. They just weren't compatible.
Divorced a second time, the single mom worked a series of jobs to support herself and her daughter.
She raised me by herself, full-time working mother, but she tried extra hard, I think, to make sure I didn't miss having another parent.
But Tracy never gave up on her childhood dream. And when her daughter was a teenager, the struggling single mom scraped up the time and money to pursue the next best thing.
She found a way to put the money together to attend the police academy, and she finished in the top 10% of her class.
And in 1998, at the age of 34, Tracy became Oglethorpe County, Georgia's first woman deputy.
She was so excited. She loved the job.
But while she'd finally realized her lifelong dream of a job in law enforcement, there was still one thing missing from Tracy's life: love.
I think she was looking for someone to fill a void that my father left in her heart.
And in the fall of 1999, she made another attempt to fill that void with a welder named Doug Benton. 3 years older than Tracy, Doug Benton was a well-known figure in Madison County.
Doug was a bodybuilder. A lot of people knew Doug because he was such a big guy.
However, the big guy was a bit of a teddy bear, too.
He was an outgoing guy, and he was very friendly.
Doug had started lifting weights at 15, but that wasn't the only habit he picked up as a teenager.
He'd started using marijuana when he was 15.
He didn't stop at pot either.
He was a steroid user, like so many people that work out at that level.
He got to be quite an alcoholic and quite a bit of a drug user.
Like Tracy, 20-year-old Doug had a child and married early.
He was married for 10 years, but it wasn't a good marriage. They fought like cats and dogs.
Although, as even his own mother concedes, Doug shouldered his fair share of the blame for the fighting.
He was a mean drunk. He wasn't nice at all. I didn't like him when he was drinking and using drugs.
The divorce, which left his ex with custody of their son, was a wake-up call for Doug.
He decided that he wanted to turn his life around.
And much like Tracy spent her early 30s chasing her long-deferred dream, Doug devoted those years to kicking his drug and alcohol habit.
When he cleaned his act up, he was my son again. It was a mother's prayer answered. It really was.
Although when he first met Tracy at a tanning salon in 1998, he still had a certain bad boy image.
When she first met Doug, he had long hair, he had tattoos.
Which is why when Doug first asked Tracy out, she told him no.
He just didn't seem to be the kind of person that she wanted to be involved with.
Spurred by rejection, Doug took his personal renewal to the next level, so that the next time he ran into Tracy, he made a very different impression.
He was all clean shaven, had his hair cut, and she finally gave in and started going out with him.
And as it turned out, Tracy and Doug had a lot in common.
They loved hunting and shooting and riding motorcycles.
And though Tracy wasn't the competitive bodybuilder Doug was, the rookie deputy was no stranger to the gym.
She loved to stay in shape, and she did lift weights, but it was more of a fitness thing.
Their attraction was more than physical, however.
He called me up, said, "Mom, I really like her." I had never seen him get that excited about another person before.
Tracy was just as smitten with Doug, too.
She told me how much she loved him. She said, "He makes me happy."
She sat me down one time and talked about how things were getting serious with them and they might get married one day and how would I feel about that.
But just as Tracy's personal life was coming together, her professional life started coming apart. In February of 2000, after 16 months on the force, Tracy resigned from her job with the Oglethorpe County Sheriff's Department.
She was not on the best of terms with the sheriff and the higher-ups in that sheriff's office.
And the reasons were spelled out in the claims she made soon after resigning.
There was a sexual harassment claim made regarding the sheriff.
Tracy alleged unequal pay and inappropriate language in the workplace.
One time there were several around and they started a conversation about what color thong she was wearing. You know, pretty off-color comments around.
Comments that had made her boyfriend, Doug, angry.
There was some bad feelings between Doug and the sheriff.
He didn't like her working down there.
He'd talked her into quitting her job.
And according to Tracy's mother, he'd been the one behind her plans to file a complaint, too.
He thought it was going to be big money.
But would Doug be around to spend it? Coming up, the investigators turn to Tracy.
Perhaps she was the last person to see him.
Could his connection to Tracy and law enforcement explain his disappearance?
There's street talk about him being a snitch.
On June 17, 2000, investigators with the Madison County, Georgia Sheriff's Department were looking into the disappearance of 38-year-old Doug Benton.
We received a call to come out to the residence to look for Mr. Benton. His neighbors were worried because they noticed he had several exotic birds that had died.
Doug's prized birds required daily feeding, and it was unusual for him to leave them neglected.
If he would have went off for a long period of time, he would have had someone to care for him in his absence.
But did that mean something had happened to Doug? The deputies hadn't found anything else out of the ordinary inside the house.
The house seemed to be pretty neat and orderly. Nothing appeared out of place, nothing indicated anything had happened in the home.
So where was Doug Benton?
Every available person we could think of to contact, we contacted trying to locate him or see if they had heard from him.
One of the first calls was to the woman Doug had been dating for the past 9 months, a former sheriff's deputy from neighboring Oglethorpe County, 35-year-old Tracy Fortson.
When she got the phone, I saw her face and she was upset. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Doug's missing."
While on the phone, Tracy had little to give the investigators, except that she hadn't seen Doug in more than a week. However, Tracy did suggest they call a friend of Doug's named Jeff.
Jeff was a bodybuilder, a friend of his. They lifted weights together.
But when the investigators contacted Jeff, he told them that he hadn't seen Doug in some time, something he blamed on Tracy.
Tracy was jealous of the time that Doug, spent with him.
And Jeff had plenty more to say about Doug's girlfriend.
Jeff told us that Tracy was very demanding and was very jealous.
In fact, Jeff told the investigators that Doug and Tracy's 9-month relationship had been a stormy one.
The general feeling was that she would really get mad at the smallest things. When there was an argument or a fight, that she would just get in her truck and go home.
The relationship between Doug and Tracy was rocky and tumultuous, I think, by most anybody's standards.
Jeff told the investigators that he hadn't seen Doug in more than a week. However, Jeff did say he'd recently seen Doug's truck.
The truck was not in his driveway as usual, but was in the driveway of a neighbor.
Acting on Jeff's tip, the investigators found Doug's truck parked outside a neighbor's house. And the neighbor told them the truck had shown up in his driveway on the morning of June 5th with the keys in the ignition and a note taped to the windshield.
The note said that he would be gone for several days and look after his truck.
The neighbor said Doug hadn't returned for the truck in the past 2 weeks, nor had the neighbor seen him. However, the neighbor with the truck and several others had seen Tracy at Doug's house.
Witnesses saw her going and coming.
Clearly, it was time for the investigators to sit down and talk to Tracy.
I think it would be easy to assume that perhaps she was the last person to see him.
And in addition to that, the investigators were also starting to wonder if what Jeff told them was true. Did Tracy and Doug's volatile relationship have anything to do with his disappearance? Questioned by the investigators, Tracy confirmed at least some of what Doug's friend Jeff had told them, that her relationship with Doug wasn't without drama.
They did have some breakups and they got back together.
Although rather than her storming off in anger the way Jeff made it out, Tracy claimed that their occasional breakups had always been Doug's idea.
Whenever they got into an argument, he would always, tell her to leave him alone, just leave me alone and just give him his space. He'll cool down and come back.
And according to Tracy, she'd always done as Doug asked.
I told her, well, if he wants you to leave him alone, then just do that. If he wants you to be his girlfriend, he will get back together with you.
Tracy said their last big fight had been just days before he disappeared on June 3rd.
They had an argument over something trivial, and he seemed to be overreacting, like he was madder at her than he should have been for that argument, and he didn't want her there.
But despite the disagreement, Tracy said she'd gone back over to Doug's house the following day, as usual.
She went over there to help him feed the birds.
And according to Tracy, that was the last time she'd seen him.
He was out of sorts and wasn't talking, wasn't saying anything.
And according to what Tracy told the investigators, a few days later, Doug had left her a message on her answering machine.
Tuesday morning, she got the message on her answering machine, don't come back, stay away from here, I don't ever want to see you anymore.
At the time, Tracy said she figured it was just Doug being dramatic. And as always, she'd done what Doug asked, which explained why she hadn't talked to him for more than a week.
She said, I feel like he needs his space. So I'm not going to push him,
But at the same time, she wondered, was it more than their usual breakup?
Tracy said that she felt like there was something really going on with him.
It just seemed like it was something bigger.
And now that Doug had disappeared, Tracy said she wondered, was he pushing her away in order to protect her? Long before he started dating a sheriff's deputy, Doug Benton was a well-known figure to law enforcement.
Most of the law enforcement officers around this area knew Doug and knew him personally. I knew him personally.
Not that the bodybuilder had been a troublemaker. Far from it.
He was someone who was, I guess you'd say, friends with the local law enforcement.
Although that friendliness raised suspicions in other parts of the community.
There's a lot of street talk about him being a snitch.
Was it possible that rather than just walk away from his troubled, drug-abusing past, Doug had actually turned informant?
He knew about drugs and the people in the drug business.
According to Doug's mother, it was true.
Doug went to court and testified against a drug dealer that put the drug dealer in prison.
An outcome that provoked a threatening response from the dealer, Doug's mother claimed.
That drug dealer right in court said, "You're dead when I get out."
Did that have something to do with Doug's disappearance? Tracy thought it might.
She feared for his life.
And it appeared that Doug had been worried too. About a year before his disappearance, he'd given his mother a videotape that he'd recorded for his son.
He wanted to have that video for his son in case something happened to him.
Exactly what Doug feared, he didn't come out and say.
I just wanted to give him something that he'll be able to remember me by in case something was to happen to me. Never can tell. God never promised you tomorrow. He just promised you today.
But now that he had vanished, was the answer obvious?
He must have been worried about somebody killing him.
Coming up, had Doug's worst fears come true?
They could see that there was a body in there.
But what else will investigators find?
The pathologist did find several stab wounds to the groin.
On Monday, June 19, 2000, 2 days after neighbors reported Tracy Fortson's boyfriend, 38-year-old Doug Benton, missing from his home in rural Madison County, Georgia, a man in neighboring Oglethorpe County noticed something unusual on the farm he managed.
He saw this watering trough, feed trough over in the woods.
The sun was just right and glinted off of that trough and caught his eye.
Curious, he decided to investigate.
He knew that he didn't put it there.
And when he got a little closer, the farm manager started to suspect that a trough wasn't all someone had left out in the woods.
It had a sort of a foul odor to it.
Afraid of what might be causing the odor, the farm manager called 911. But when the investigators arrived, they discovered that the suspicious trough was filled with cement.
So they took a tractor with a hay baler on the front and picked the trough up and dropped it a time or two to crack the cement. And when they did that, they could see that there was a body in there.
Part of his shoulder was exposed, and there was a tattoo there that they could distinctly see.
But whose body was buried in the concrete? Comparing the tattoo against the open missing persons cases led them to a possible identity.
It was known with local law enforcement that this individual was missing, and they had a description of him.
They matched up with Doug Benton.
Doug Benton had been found, and by the end of the day, the trough containing his body was on its way to the crime lab in Atlanta.
That's where they actually chipped away all the concrete and exhumed the body.
But how had he ended up in a concrete-filled trough in the woods? At the scene, investigators found some key clues.
You could see the tire marks.
And near the tire tracks, they found another curious set of marks.
We found a pine tree with very deep, distinct rope marks, rope impressions in the bark.
Connecting those two sets of marks, the investigators were able to piece together a theory of how the heavy trough was dumped in the woods.
A lariat had been tied around the tree and then tied to the end of the watering trough.
And as whoever dumped the body drove away, the rope did its job.
It would have jerked it off of the truck where it was discovered.
But who had hauled Doug Benton's body out to that lonely spot? And exactly how had he died? Back home in Madison County, there were rumors that Doug was a drug informant.
I think he was working undercover with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Was his death possibly payback?
Some drug dealers. One in particular made the statement that when he got out of prison, he was going to kill Doug.
Perhaps the autopsy would provide additional clues. The next morning, the medical examiner's crew carefully chipped the concrete away from Doug's body.
It was pretty well preserved because it was in concrete.
And that preservation made it easier to determine exactly how Doug had died.
He was shot in the top of the head.
The .22 bullet was still in Doug's body. Could it help identify the murder weapon?
The bullet had pancaked so much entering the body, they were not capable of making a sufficient identification to tie it to a particular gun.
So, hoping to find more evidence, Madison County investigators got a warrant and went back to Doug Benton's house to conduct a thorough search. And as soon as they walked in, they discovered something had changed since their initial visit.
There was a strong kerosene smell in the house.
Someone had doused the carpet in the living room with kerosene.
Candles had been placed in different locations.
Somebody wanted to destroy the evidence that may have been in that house.
But the makeshift fuses had failed to ignite the kerosene.
They just fizzled out.
So investigators began an in-depth search to find out what the would-be arsonist had been trying so desperately to hide.
They pulled up the carpet padding and you could see the blood.
Bloodstains around the couch and inside of it.
Once you moved the cushions, you could see that's where the blood had drained.
There was enough blood there to lead us to believe that's where he was murdered.
The deputies had missed it the first time, back when all they were investigating was a missing persons case.
It had been cleaned to the point you would not notice it immediately with the naked eye.
The bloodstains, combined with the fact that Doug had been shot in the top of the head, made it clear to investigators how he had been killed.
Someone was standing almost behind him at the couch while he was asleep, shot him in the top of the head.
But who had pulled the trigger? Was it a hitman, a drug dealer seeking vengeance? Or was it possible that the killer had been someone much closer to Doug? Because while the gunshot to the head was what killed Doug, it wasn't the only injury the autopsy uncovered.
He also had multiple stab wounds.
Wounds in a very particular place, too.
The pathologist did find several stab wounds to the groin.
And according to the pathologist, they appeared to be post-mortem.
That type of genital area mutilation can be indicative of a jilted lover's type thing.
And if it was a jilted lover's thing, that made Tracy a suspect.
Investigation turned towards Tracy due to the fact that she had been in a relationship with Doug.
However, that wasn't the only reason the investigators suspected that the 35-year-old knew more about Doug's disappearance than she'd originally let on. Doug's body had been found in Oglethorpe County, an area Tracy knew well.
She had previously worked as a deputy sheriff in Oglethorpe County.
But the main thing that made Tracy the focus of the investigation came from the farm manager who'd found Doug's body.
Tracy Fortson actually had hunting privileges on the property where the body was found.
I had asked the farm manager, I said, do you know Tracy's truck? And he said, yeah, I saw it out here all the time.
The farm manager couldn't recall seeing Tracy's truck on the property recently. But for the investigators, the fact that she was familiar with the property where the body had been found was more than enough to raise suspicion, especially when coupled with what they knew about her relationship with Doug.
Based on some of the interviews that we conducted, it was very obvious they had a hostile relationship.
So not long after Doug's body was found, the investigators brought Tracy in for more questions.
She was much more guarded, much more contentious than in the original interview.
She was not cooperating.
Not that it did much to deter the investigators. On June 21st, 2 days after finding Doug's body, the investigators showed up at Tracy's house with a search warrant.
They searched her house, and it looked like a tornado went through there. They tore up everything.
They found a .22 caliber rifle in the attic. But while it was the same caliber as the gun that killed Doug, the discovery wasn't terribly incriminating all by itself.
She's been in law enforcement, been around guns all her life.
However, the .22 wasn't all the search uncovered.
They found receipts for the concrete and the horse trough.
And the investigators were convinced that the purchases couldn't be a coincidence.
She purchased the trough where the body was found. She purchased the cement that was in the trough where the body was found.
While the investigators searched Tracy's house, she was a few miles away with her daughter, waiting at her parents' house.
Everybody was there and everybody was upset. My mom was sitting on the couch and I was sitting beside her holding her hand and she was crying.
And when the investigators contacted her and asked her to come down to the sheriff's department for another round of questioning, the former deputy could guess what was coming.
She was shocked. We were all shocked. It was like a nightmare.
Everybody that was there started telling my mom bye, hugging her, and they were all crying and telling her bye. She hugged me. She took off her necklace and she gave it to me. And she hugged me again and she whispered in my ear for me to be strong for her.
At the sheriff's department that evening, Tracy invoked her right to remain silent.
She would not talk to law enforcement. She never gave another statement.
Despite that, the receipts they'd found in her house, her connection to the property where Doug's body had been found, and the contentious nature of their relationship gave the authorities plenty to use against her in a court of law. So at 6 that evening, the sheriff's investigators placed Tracy under arrest for the murder of Doug Benton.
They found him dead on Monday, and Tracy was arrested on Wednesday. You ask me, that's a pretty fast investigation.
Coming up, could someone have framed Tracy for murder?
They never even looked at anybody else.
Or will the evidence at trial prove that she killed Doug?
I firmly believe those scratch marks came from that trough.
On July 9, 2001, Tracy Fortson went on trial in the Madison County Courthouse in Danielsville, Georgia. The 36-year-old former sheriff's deputy was charged with the murder of her boyfriend, Doug Benton.
There's no way she could have done that. And I knew right off the bat. I mean, I was only 15, but I still knew that my mom did not kill anybody.
And Tracy's daughter wasn't alone in that belief. The courtroom was packed with people convinced that she was innocent.
Several people didn't want to believe that a female alone could have moved a body the size of Doug's by herself.
But in his opening statement, the prosecutor argued that Tracy killed Doug after an argument and that the evidence would prove it.
He was sleeping on the couch or dozing on the couch, and she came up and put a .22 rifle to the head and shot him.
And then, not satisfied with merely shooting her boyfriend, she'd stabbed him repeatedly in the genitals.
The stab wounds would make it very personal.
And the prosecution claimed that once Doug was dead, it was easy
rope.
He created a plausible scenario for how she might have done that.
But did that mean it was true? Despite the fact that the investigators had found a .22 caliber rifle at Tracy's house, they couldn't prove it was the murder weapon.
The best anybody could say about the bullet ballistically was that it could have been fired from a gun she had.
The cement-filled trough that Doug's body had been dumped in was easy to tie to Tracy, though, thanks to the receipts the investigators had found in her kitchen.
Tracy was stuck with the fact that she purchased the cement and the trough.
And according to the prosecution, she'd done more than purchase them. On the stand, the investigators testified that when they impounded Tracy's truck, they'd made yet another discovery that pointed to her as Doug's killer.
When we processed Tracy Fortson's vehicle for evidence, in the bed of her truck, there were cement splatters everywhere.
There were actually slosh marks from putting the concrete in the watering trough and stirring it.
And based on the pattern of those spatters, the investigators were convinced the trough had been in the back of Tracy's truck when Doug was entombed in concrete.
There was a void area in the back of the truck where the watering trough would have been.
Which was consistent with the measurements on that trough.
And according to the investigators, there were a series of fresh scratches in the bed of Tracy's truck, too.
I firmly believe those scratch marks came from that trough when it was slid with all that weight in it out of that truck.
And if that wasn't enough, the prosecutors had one more piece of evidence for the jury: the note left on Doug's truck.
It wasn't Doug's handwriting.
But the prosecutor couldn't prove that Tracy had written it.
Our analysts said it was obviously written to disguise the handwriting.
Though there was something about the note that did point to the former deputy sheriff.
The note was taped onto the window with tape that is commonly used in processing crime scenes and lifting latent fingerprints.
It was compelling evidence. But was it enough to prove that Tracy had killed her boyfriend? Not according to the defense.
It just seemed like everything they had on her was circumstantial.
The defense also pointed out that Tracy had nothing to gain from killing Doug.
They never came up with a motive.
Plus, since Tracy had worked in law enforcement, wouldn't she know better than to use the fingerprint tape or leave evidence lying around, much less the murder weapon?
I don't believe any police officer would keep a gun after they murdered somebody. If Tracy had killed that guy, that gun would be in the ocean. It would be in a quarry. It would not be where the Madison County Sheriff's Department could find it.
In fact, the evidence Tracy had allegedly left lying around after the crime was even enough to give Doug's mother pause.
You don't leave evidence of a crime you've committed right out in plain view for everybody to discover in your house. To me, that points to innocence.
And as for where the killer dumped Doug's body, the defense asked the jury to consider whether a veteran law enforcement officer, one who'd graduated the academy at the top of her class, would make such a rookie mistake.
Tracy would not have left a body on land that everybody in the county knows she hunts on. That would lead it back to her.
Still, Tracy had bought a trough and concrete.
There was no attempt whatsoever to cover up the fact she had bought these items.
According to the defense, there was no attempt to cover up the purchases because there were perfectly innocent explanations for both.
She kept a horse just down the road from our house.
Tracy had been talking about pouring a cement pad for her dog kennel.
That was my idea, for her to build a pad for her dog.
And the defense claimed that when she'd brought the trough and cement home, she'd left them both outside.
It looked like it was going to rain, so she unloaded the trough and the concrete bags into her carport.
But then, a few days later,
When she got home, everything was gone, that trough, the cement, everything.
at the time, Tracy had blamed the disappearance on Doug.
She thought Doug had taken it as some, little lover spat thing, that he was sort of childish like that and he would take her stuff.
But since Doug was dead, the defense suggested that the real killer had stolen the cement and the trough.
There could be somebody else that committed the murder.
Was it possible Tracy had been framed?
A man had been sentenced to some prison time based upon the help or cooperation of Doug Benton and swore to get him later.
He was out at the time of Doug's death.
Yet, according to the defense, the investigators had never really considered him a suspect.
I don't believe they really ever had any interest in pursuing that.
They never even looked at anybody else.
Would it be enough to raise reasonable doubt, despite the fact that Tracy never took the stand?
Tracy did not testify. She was advised not to.
The answer came on July 12th, when the jury delivered its verdict.
The verdict was guilty of murder and guilty of attempted arson.
She was just stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. None of us could.
Coming up, is Tracy's verdict justice?
It just breaks my heart. It's another victim.
Or will she get a second chance?
The Supreme Court of Georgia agreed.
By March of 2004, it had been almost 3 years since a Georgia jury had found Tracy Fortson guilty of murdering her boyfriend, Doug Benton.
When they found her guilty, I went to pieces. I lost it. My husband had to practically drag me out of the courthouse.
Tracy's mother wasn't the only one upset by the outcome either. Even Doug's mom had her doubts.
I didn't feel satisfied because I had a lot of questions.
And as it turned out, so did the Georgia Supreme Court. After her conviction, Tracy appealed on the grounds that her defense had been inadequate.
The Supreme Court of Georgia agreed with her appeal and reversed the conviction.
The case was overturned on ineffective assistance of defense counsel during the jury selection.
So on March 22nd, 2004, Tracy went on trial a second time in an entirely different courtroom.
It was tried the second time in Effingham County, which is right there at Savannah on the coast.
We thought that would be good, since it wasn't local.
And unlike the first trial, this time the 39-year-old took the stand in her own defense.
She was a good witness.
But would Tracy's testimony make the difference?
She was convicted again.
I couldn't believe it.
It was just the same thing all over again. It's devastation.
The judge sentenced Tracy to life in prison. But her friends and family remain convinced that she is innocent.
I know Tracy's not guilty because I grew up with her. I know how she is. There's no way that Tracy did this.
I thought it was a miscarriage of justice. I think the whole affair is a miscarriage of justice.
Not just the trial, either. They doubt the entire investigation.
Somebody decided that she should pay for this crime, and they made it happen. They just pointed the finger at her and said she did it, and that was it.
And why would the investigators do that? Some suspect that Tracy's allegations of sexual harassment against the Oglethorpe County Sheriff's Department had something to do with it.
They don't like being sued. And that would give them reason to be very pleased for Tracy to go to jail.
Though the idea that Tracy's complaints about the sheriff influenced the investigation may seem far-fetched, even Doug's mother remains convinced that Tracy didn't kill her son.
It does me no good to lose a son and then think somebody that didn't shoot him is serving time in prison. It just breaks my heart. It's another victim.
Blackridge County, 1979, the forgotten witness fiction. The town of Blackridge never expected to become the center of a mystery. Nestled between endless stretches of farmland and dense pine forests, it was a kind of place where morning began with the sound of grain trucks rumbling down two-lane highways, and evenings ended with porch lights glowing quietly beneath an ocean of stars. Everyone knew everyone else. Birthdays, weddings, church picnics, and high school football games filled the local newspaper far more often than crime ever did. People believed that evil belonged somewhere else, somewhere larger, somewhere distant. Then, on an unusually cool August evening in 1979, that belief vanished forever. At 8:17 p.m., the final customer left Miller's General Store carrying a paper bag filled with groceries. The cashier locked the front door, waved goodnight to the owner, and watched the headlights disappear down Main Street. It was the last ordinary moment the town would remember. Less than an hour later, the county dispatch radio crackled to life. A pickup truck had been found idling beside Hollow Creek Road. Its driver's door stood open, its headlights illuminated an empty stretch of gravel disappearing into the darkness. There was no driver, no passengers, only silence. Deputy Harold Mason arrived within minutes. He expected another stranded motorist, perhaps someone walking to a nearby farmhouse for help. Instead, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The engine was still running. The driver's wallet rested neatly on the seat. The keys remained in the ignition. A thermos of coffee sat untouched in the cup holder. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared damaged. Yet the owner of the truck had simply disappeared. Harold stepped into the darkness, calling the man's name. Only crickets answered. His flashlight swept across roadside weeds, shallow drainage ditches, and towering trees whose branches blocked nearly every trace of moonlight. Then the beam stopped. A single boot print. Fresh. Deep, leading away from the road. Another print followed. Then another, one set of footprints. Only one. They continued toward the woods before suddenly fading into hard, rocky ground where the trail simply vanished. Search teams arrived before midnight. Volunteers from every corner of Blackridge joined the effort. Farmers brought tractors equipped with floodlights. Hunters volunteered tracking dogs. Firefighters searched abandoned barns. The county sheriff requested assistance from neighboring departments. By sunrise, nearly 200 people had searched more than 15 square miles. They found nothing. No clothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Not even another footprint. The missing man, 38-year-old Daniel Mercer, had become a ghost overnight. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some claimed he had abandoned his family. Others whispered that he had stumbled across an illegal operation hidden deep inside the forest. Older residents told stories about forgotten mine shafts capable of swallowing entire vehicles. Each explanation sounded less convincing than the last. Daniel's wife refused to believe any of them. He would never leave, she told investigators. He promised he'd be home before dinner. Inside the Mercer house, everything supported her story. Dinner plates remained untouched. A birthday gift for their daughter sat wrapped on the kitchen table. His work boots for the next morning waited beside the back door. Nothing suggested a man planning to disappear. Sheriff Walter Briggs understood something immediately. Missing adults were uncommon. Missing adults who vanished beside an abandoned truck with their wallet still inside were almost unheard of. He ordered every available resource into the field. Helicopters flew grid patterns across the surrounding forests. Mounted search teams followed dried creek beds. Divers entered nearby ponds despite dangerously cold water. The investigation consumed the county. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, newspaper headlines changed. Volunteers returned to work. The search ended, but the questions remained. Where had Daniel Mercer gone? Why had he left the truck running? And who, or what, had been waiting beyond the tree line that night? For years, the file gathered dust inside the sheriff's evidence room. New investigators occasionally reopened it, hoping fresh eyes might discover what their predecessors had missed. Every attempt ended the same way. No witnesses, no suspects, no body, no answers. The case became known simply as a Hollow Creek disappearance, a mystery discussed in diners, barbershops, and church basements whenever conversation drifted toward unsolved crimes. Parents warned children never to walk Hollow Creek Road after dark. Teenagers dared one another to visit the abandoned turnout where the truck had been found. Most returned claiming they had heard whispers carried by the wind. None brought back evidence. Then, more than 4 decades later, an old woman walked quietly into Blackridge Sheriff's office, carrying a small metal box. She placed it gently on the front desk. "I think," she said softly, "I've been afraid long enough." Inside the box rested dozens of yellow photographs, a faded notebook, several unopened letters tied together with worn blue ribbon, and one small cassette tape labeled only with a date, August 18, 1979. The dispatcher looked at her, confused. "Ma'am." She interrupted before he could finish. "I was there." The room fell silent. No one spoke for several seconds. Because, if what she had just said was true, then Blackridge County's oldest mystery had never truly lacked a witness. It had simply waited 45 years for someone to find the courage to speak. The woman introduced herself as Eleanor Whitmore. She was 78 years old. Her hands trembled as she removed her gloves, but her voice remained remarkably steady. Sheriff Ethan Brooks, who had inherited the Hollow Creek file only 3 years earlier, invited her into the interview room without asking another question. He had spent most of his career believing the case was destined to remain a permanent mystery. Now, for the first time, someone had voluntarily walked to the front door, claiming to have been there. A recorder clicked on. The room fell silent. Eleanor stared at the cassette tape resting on the table between them. "I never wanted anyone to hear this," she whispered. "Then why now?" Brooks asked gently. She looked toward the rain-covered window. "Because everyone I was afraid of is dead." The sentence changed the atmosphere inside the room. Not because it identified a suspect, because it suggested something investigators had never seriously considered. Fear, real fear, the kind capable of silencing a witness for nearly half a century. Eleanor explained that in the summer of 1979, she had worked evenings at a small roadside cafe less than 2 miles from Hollow Creek Road. Truck drivers stopped there almost every night. Farmers drank coffee before heading home. Teenagers gathered after baseball games. She remembered faces, voices, vehicles, ordinary routines. August 18th had begun no differently, until shortly after 8 o'clock. A man entered the cafe wearing a dark work jacket, despite the warm weather. He ordered coffee, never touched it. Instead, he sat near the window watching traffic. He wasn't waiting to eat, Eleanor said. He was waiting for someone. Brooks leaned forward. "Did you recognize him?" She hesitated. "No, but I remembered his eyes." "What about them?" "They never stopped moving." She described him as calm, almost unnaturally calm, not nervous, not excited, simply patient. Every few minutes he glanced toward the highway before checking the wall clock. Then, without finishing his coffee, he stood. He placed exact change beside the cup, walked outside, started an older sedan, and drove away. Nothing about his behavior appeared criminal, nothing worth reporting, until later that night. The next morning, Eleanor learned that Daniel Mercer had disappeared. She immediately remembered the man in the cafe. but she said nothing. Why? Because 3 nights later, the same sedan returned. This time it stopped outside her apartment. The engine idled for nearly 10 minutes. She never saw the driver. She never opened the curtains. When she finally looked outside, the car was gone. It happened again a week later. Then again, always at night, always silent. No threats, no notes, only the unmistakable feeling that someone wanted her to know she was being watched. I convinced myself it was coincidence, she said. But deep down, she paused. I knew. Brooks asked the obvious question. Why didn't you tell the sheriff? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I was 29. I had 2 little boys. My husband worked nights. I kept thinking, if someone really was watching me, then what would happen if I spoke? No one in the room judged her. Fear has a way of rewriting courage. The photographs inside Eleanor's metal box were ordinary family pictures. Birthday parties, church gatherings, county fairs. Nothing unusual, until investigators reached the final roll. One image showed the cafe parking lot on the evening of August 18th. Children played near a picnic table. Pickup trucks lined the gravel shoulder. And near the far edge of the frame, an older dark sedan. Its driver stood beside the open door. The man's face was partially turned away, too distant for identification. Yet one detail immediately caught Brooks' attention. The rear bumper carried a large dent shaped almost like a crescent moon. He had seen it before, not in the Hollow Creek file. Somewhere else. Somewhere buried in another unsolved investigation. He couldn't remember where, but he knew the image, and that realization sent a chill through the room. Because if the same damaged vehicle appeared in another cold case, then Daniel Mercer's disappearance might never have been an isolated crime. It might have been the beginning of something much larger. Brooks carefully placed a photograph into an evidence sleeve. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. For 45 years, a mystery had survived because there had been no witness willing to speak. Now there was. And with her testimony came something investigators had never possessed before. A direction, not certainty. Not proof, but the first real path forward since that August night in 1979. As Brooks looked once more at the faded photograph, he realized the investigation had not been reopened. It had finally begun. Sheriff Ethan Brooks barely slept. The photograph from Eleanor Whitmore's collection remained on his desk long after everyone else had gone home. He had enlarged it until film grain nearly dissolved into abstract patterns, studying every shadow, every parked vehicle, every reflection trapped inside the faded image. The damaged rear bumper. He knew he had seen it before. The memory lingered just beyond reach. Not a face, not a name, just a fragment. By sunrise, he was already descending the narrow staircase into the county archive beneath the courthouse. The basement smelled of old paper and dust. Metal shelves stretched from one wall to the other, stacked with investigation files dating back decades. Most had never been digitized. Every folder represented someone's unanswered questions. Brooks began pulling boxes at random. Disappearances, vehicle thefts, unidentified remains, rural assaults. Hour after hour passed. Then, shortly after noon, he froze. A faded evidence photograph from another investigation lay open beneath the fluorescent lights. A roadside gas station, taken in October 1981. Parked beside a fuel pump sat an older dark sedan. The rear bumper carried the same crescent-shaped dent. It couldn't be coincidence. The angle was different. The lighting was different, but the damage appeared identical. Brooks immediately requested the complete case file. The 1981 investigation involved the disappearance of a traveling insurance salesman named Robert Ellis. He had vanished while driving between 2 neighboring counties. His abandoned company car was discovered 40 miles away. His wallet remained inside, his briefcase untouched. No suspect had ever been identified. Brooks read every page. One sentence stopped him cold. Witness reports seeing an unidentified dark sedan parked across the highway approximately 30 minutes before victim disappeared. The vehicle had never been located. No license plate recorded. The description was too generic to pursue. Until now, Brooks called Detective Lena Ortiz from the State Cold Case Unit. She arrived before sunset, carrying 3 additional archive boxes. You think they're connected? I don't know, Brooks admitted, but I think we've been asking the wrong question. What question? We've always asked who took Daniel Mercer. He pointed toward the second case file. Maybe we should be asking whether Daniel was the first. The next week became an exercise in patience. Investigators searched newspaper archives from the late 1970s and early 1980s, looking not for identical crimes, but for repeated details that had once seemed meaningless. Abandoned vehículos, wallets left behind, drivers vanishing from isolated county roads. The list slowly grew. 3 cases, then 5, eventually 7. None had been officially linked. Each occurred in a different county, different victims, different investigators, different jurisdictions. But every disappearance unfolded in remarkably similar circumstances. Vehículos abandonados, no signs of robbery, no confirmed witnesses, no bodies recovered, and now, possibly the same damaged sedan appearing near at least 2 of them. Lena spread a highway map across the conference table. Red pins marked every disappearance. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then she noticed something. They're following Route 16. Brooks looked closer. Not exactly. The disappearances weren't occurring on Route 16 itself. They clustered along the smaller county roads, branching away from it. Roads used primarily by local residents and commercial drivers. Roads where traffic became sparse after sunset. Someone familiar with the region could move almost unnoticed. Meanwhile, forensic specialists examined Eleanor's photographs using modern enhancement software. The technology couldn't invent missing detail, but it could recover information hidden within aging film. Hours later, another surprise emerged. Reflected faintly inside the cafe window stood a second person, only a partial silhouette, almost invisible. The figure appeared to be watching the same sedan Eleanor had described. Not the cafe, not the customers. The car. Brooks stared at the screen. If that's another witness. Lena finished the thought that then we've been missing 2 people all these years. The cassette tape proved equally intriguing. It contained nearly 30 minutes of muffled audio recorded accidentally during a family picnic earlier that evening. Children laughed. Someone tuned a portable radio. Adults talked over one another. Nothing related to the disappearance. Until the final 90 seconds. An automobile engine started nearby. A car door slammed. Then, faintly, a horn sounded twice. Pause. Once more. 3 short blasts. The sound seemed insignificant. Yet Eleanor immediately reacted. I remember that. What? The man in the cafe looked toward the highway after hearing those horns. You think it was a signal? I don't know. But he left immediately. Brooks replayed the recording again. 3 brief horn blasts. Coincidence. Or communication. The investigation suddenly had another thread to follow. For the first time in 45 years, the Hollow Creek mystery no longer felt like a single forgotten disappearance. It was beginning to resemble something far more deliberate. And somewhere beyond the scattered evidence, hidden beneath decades of silence, someone else's story was still waiting to be uncovered. The pattern refused to disappear. Sheriff Ethan Brooks stood in front of the investigation board as dawn filtered through the windows of the Blackridge Sheriff's Office. Red strings now stretched between counties, dates, witness statements, and faded photographs. Individually, every case had once looked like an isolated tragedy. Together, they formed something much harder to ignore. Not a certainty, a possibility. And sometimes in cold case investigations, possibilities were all detectives had to begin with. Detective Lena Ortiz spent the next week traveling between county archives, requesting boxes that had not been opened in decades. Dust covered most of the folders. Some reports had been typed on aging typewriters. Others contained handwritten notes from investigators who had long since retired or passed away. The files all shared one frustrating characteristic. None contained enough evidence to solve the case. Yet each contained one overlooked detail. A waitress remembered a dark sedan parked outside a diner. A deputy recalled tire tracks leading onto a gravel road before disappearing in heavy rain. A farmer reported hearing a car engine long after midnight near an abandoned bridge. None of those details had meant much at the time. Now they seemed to echo one another across years. Brooks believed the answer might not lie in the crimes themselves. It might lie in geography. He requested historical highway maps from the late 1970s and laid them beside modern satellite imagery. Road construction had changed dramatically over 4 decades. Entire stretches of highway had been rerouted. Old service roads had vanished beneath new pavement. Bridges had been replaced. Forests had reclaimed abandoned routes. One faded county map revealed something unexpected. In 1979, Hollow Creek Road connected directly to an old logging route that no longer existed. The road had provided a quiet shortcut between 3 neighboring counties. Few people remembered it. Commercial drivers certainly would have. Brooks circled the route in red ink. If someone knew these back roads, he said quietly, they could travel for hours without passing through a single town. Lena nodded, and without attracting attention, another call arrived before noon. A retired highway patrol officer named Raymond Ellis had seen the public appeal for information. I don't know if it matters, he told Brooks over the phone, but I remember stopping a dark sedan sometime around 1980. Brooks immediately arranged an interview. Raymond arrived carrying a weathered notebook he had kept throughout his career. Unlike official reports, the notebook contained personal observations, license numbers, old conversations, vehicles that seemed memorable. After nearly an hour of searching, Raymond stopped at one page. There, he pointed toward an entry dated April 1980. Older dark sedan, rear bumper dented, driver unusually calm. Brooks felt his pulse quicken. What happened? I stopped him for a broken taillight. Did you identify him? Raymond frowned. I ran the license. But the registration came back valid. So why remember him? Raymond closed the notebook. He asked me something. What? He wanted to know whether Hollow Creek Road stayed open all night. The room fell silent. The question itself wasn't suspicious. Drivers often asked about road conditions, but combined with everything else, it carried new weight. Brooks requested archived vehicle registration records. Unfortunately, most had been destroyed years earlier under state retention policies. Another door had closed. Still, Raymond's notebook proved one important fact. The damaged sedan had definitely existed, and someone driving it had shown unusual interest in Hollow Creek Road. Meanwhile, forensic analysts completed enhancement of Eleanor Whitmore's final photograph. The improvement was subtle. No dramatic revelation appeared, but one small object became clearer. The unidentified man beside the sedan wore a distinctive belt buckle shaped like an eagle with outstretched wings. Lena enlarged the image. Military. Brooks shook his head. Could be. Could also be decorative. Still, it was another identifying feature. Another thread. The investigation gained unexpected momentum when a local newspaper published an article about the reopened case. Within days, dozens of people called the sheriff's office. Most tips led nowhere. Mistaken memories. Rumors repeated for decades. Stories that changed with every retelling. Then one caller said something different. I remember the horns. Brooks immediately picked up the line. The caller introduced himself as Samuel Pierce, a retired railroad maintenance worker. I used to finish shifts near the old crossing outside Hollow Creek. Brooks listened carefully. Did you hear 3 horn blasts? Samuel answered without hesitation. Not once. Several times. The sheriff exchanged a glance with Lena. When? Usually late evenings. What did you think they meant? I assumed truckers were signaling one another, but there was something strange. What? They always came from different directions. Samuel paused, like 2 vehicles answering each other. That single observation transformed the investigation. If Samuel's memory was accurate, then the mysterious horn sequence might not have been random at all. It might have been communication, not between strangers, between people expecting one another. Brooks wrote 3 words across the center of the evidence board. Who answered back? The room fell quiet once more. Because for the first time since Eleanor Whitmore walked into the sheriff's office carrying her metal box, the investigation had uncovered something entirely new. Perhaps the man in the dark sedan hadn't been alone. Perhaps someone else had been waiting beyond Hollow Creek Road that August night. And if that were true, then Black Ridge County's oldest mystery was about to become far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The possibility of a second person changed everything. For 45 years, investigators had searched for one unknown individual moving silently through the darkness surrounding Hollow Creek Road. Every theory, every interview, every reconstruction assumed a lone offender. Now, 3 short horn blasts and the testimony of a retired railroad worker suggested something far more unsettling. Someone may have been waiting, not by chance, by arrangement. Sheriff Ethan Brooks erased nearly half of the investigation board and started again. Red strings disappeared. New ones took their place. Instead of building the timeline around Daniel Mercer's disappearance, Brooks centered around the unidentified sedan. Where had it been seen? Who had noticed it? How long had it remained in each location? The vehicle, not the victim, became the investigation's focal point. Patterns emerged almost immediately. The sedan rarely stayed in one place for long. Witnesses described it parked near diners, gas stations, roadside cafes, and highway pull-offs, but almost never in town centers. It lingered at the edges of communities, where strangers blended easily with passing traffic and few people remembered faces. It behaved like its driver, always present, never noticeable. Detective Lena Ortiz contacted neighboring state police agencies, asking them to search archive reports for one specific detail. Unusual horn signals. Most apartments responded within days. Nearly all reported nothing. Then an investigator from Pine Ridge County found an incident report dated September 1980. The report described a truck driver who complained about 2 cars exchanging horn signals near an abandoned rail crossing shortly before midnight. Deputies investigated. Nothing remained. The complaint had been dismissed as teenagers playing pranks. Brooks compared the location with historical highway maps. The abandoned crossing connected directly to the same forgotten network of county roads surrounding Hollow Creek. The coincidence was becoming difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, forensic specialists turned their attention to the cassette tape once more. This time they weren't listening for voices. They were listening for engines, using modern audio software. Technicians isolated the background sounds buried beneath the family picnic recording. The first engine matched an older V8 sedan. Nothing surprising. The second was different, heavier, lower, possibly a pickup truck. The timing was fascinating. The sedan started first. 3 horn blasts followed. Then, several seconds later, the deeper engine came to life somewhere farther away. Lena replayed the sequence again and again. It almost sounds. She hesitated, coordinated. Brooks nodded slowly. If that's true, someone answered. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A volunteer at the County Historical Society discovered several boxes of undeveloped newspaper negatives donated decades earlier by the now-defunct Black Ridge Gazette. Most documented ordinary community events, parades, school sports, election campaigns. One strip of film, however, contained photographs taken during the weekend Daniel Mercer disappeared. The newspaper had never published them. No one knew why. The negatives were carefully restored. Frame after frame revealed familiar scenes from downtown Black Ridge. Then came an image of the courthouse parking lot. Several vehicles sat beneath large oak trees. Near the far corner, the dark sedan appeared once again. This time, the driver's door stood open. A man leaned casually against the roof, reading a folded highway map. His face remained partly hidden beneath the shadow of a baseball cap. But one detail stood out immediately. The large, eagle-shaped belt buckle. Exactly like the one visible in Eleanor Whitmore's photograph. Independent photographs. Different days. Same distinctive object. The investigation finally possessed something stronger than memory. Brooks enlarged the newspaper negative until the buckle nearly filled the screen. It wasn't military. It resembled a commemorative buckle sold at regional rodeos during the late 1970s. The Historical Society produced old catalogs confirming the design had been available for only 2 years. A small detail, but valuable. Rare items reduced possibilities. Weeks passed as investigators tracked rodeo attendance records, vendor receipts, and historical photographs. Thousands of names. Hundreds of dead ends. Then Owen Pierce, the department civilian analyst, noticed something almost everyone else overlooked. One rodeo vendor had accepted mail-order purchases. Customers mailed handwritten order forms. The surviving business records had been donated to a local museum. Most were incomplete, but several still listed names and addresses. Brooks wasn't expecting a miracle. He simply hoped to identify how widely the buckle had been distributed. The museum curator produced 3 aging ledgers. Dust drifted through the air as pages were turned. Order after order. Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, then Blackridge County. Only one order, placed in the spring of 1978. The purchaser's name had faded almost completely. Only the initials remained. Ash. Brooks stared at the page. Not enough for an identification. Not even close. But it was the first documented connection between the buckle and Blackridge County itself. Another fragment. Another quiet piece joining the puzzle. Late that evening, Brooks drove alone to Hollow Creek Road. The old logging route had long since disappeared beneath thick forest. Nature had reclaimed everything. He parked beside the weathered roadside marker where Daniel Mercer's truck had once been found. Crickets filled the silence. The wind moved gently through towering pines. Standing there in the darkness, Brooks realized something. The mystery had never survived because the evidence was absent. It survived because every clue had been scattered across decades, counties, and forgotten archives. No detective in 1979 could have connected photographs developed years apart. No investigator in 1981 could compare audio recordings with digital software that didn't yet exist. No witness could know that their ordinary memory of 3-horn blasts would one day become meaningful. The truth hadn't been invisible. It had simply been waiting for every piece to exist at the same time. Brooks looked into the trees beyond the abandoned road. Somewhere out there, 45 years earlier, 2 vehicles may have met beneath the cover of darkness. 2 engines, 3-horn blasts. 1 man who never came home. And perhaps someone who had watched everything happen, remaining silent until history finally gave him a reason to speak. The investigation entered a new phase. For the first time since Eleanor Whitmore had walked into the sheriff's office, Sheriff Ethan Brooks stopped asking what had happened on the night Daniel Mercer disappeared. Instead, he asked a different question. Who benefited from 45 years of silence? It was a subtle change, but subtle changes often solved impossible cases. The State Crime Analysis Unit digitized every piece of evidence collected from the previous 4 parts of the investigation. Old photographs, witness statements, cassette recordings, archived newspaper negatives, handwritten notes. Every document became part of a searchable timeline. The software wasn't looking for suspects. It was looking for repetition. Road names, business names, dates, vehicle descriptions, patterns hidden too deeply for the human eye. Hours later, analyst Owen Pierce walked into the operations room carrying a printout. I think we missed something. Everyone gathered around. The computer had highlighted one location that appeared repeatedly across unrelated records. Harris Fuel and Supply. The old truck stop had appeared in 3 separate investigations spanning nearly 6 years. Never as a crime scene. Never as a place where anyone disappeared. Only as the last confirmed stop made by different people before they vanished. Brooks frowned. Has anyone been there recently? Owen shook his head. It burned down in 1996. The following morning, Brooks and Detective Lena Ortiz drove to what remained of Harris Fuel and Supply. Only a cracked concrete foundation survived beneath waist-high weeds. The gas pumps were gone. The restaurant had collapsed years earlier. Nature had nearly erased the business from existence. A neighboring farmer watched them from across a fence. "You looking for Harris?" Brooks nodded. The old farmer smiled sadly. Everyone used to stop there. Truckers, traveling salesmen, families. It never closed. Then his smile disappeared, until after the fire. Brooks asked if he remembered anything unusual during the late 70s. The farmer remained quiet for several moments. "I remember one thing." "What?" "There was always the same dark sedan parked there." Brooks exchanged a glance with Lena. "Always?" The farmer nodded slowly. "Not every day, but often enough that people joked it belonged to the owner." "Did you ever see the driver?" "No. Funny thing, it was almost always there before sunrise and gone before lunch." Back at headquarters, investigators examined tax records for Harris Fuel and Supply. Ownership documents revealed several changes during the 1970s. Nothing criminal, nothing suspicious, until one lease agreement caught Owen's attention. A small storage garage behind the truck stop had been rented privately between 1978 and 1982. The renter's name had been erased by water damage. Only one detail remained legible: cash payments, every month, no forwarding address. Meanwhile, forensic specialists enhanced another section of Eleanor Whitmore's cassette tape. Most of the recording consisted of harmless family conversation, children laughing, someone lighting a charcoal grill, a portable radio playing country music. Then, almost hidden beneath the noise, a voice, only 4 words: "Male, come, he's leaving now." The words were barely audible. No one could identify the speaker. No one knew whether the sentence related to Daniel Mercer at all. But the timing aligned almost perfectly with Eleanor's memory of the man leaving the cafe after hearing 3 horn blasts. Someone had been watching. Someone had reported movement. The realization spread quickly through the investigation team. If the voice referred to Daniel, then the disappearance hadn't depended upon chance. It depended upon communication. Brooks stood before the growing evidence wall. Photographs, maps, Audiospektrograms, witness statements, historical records. Each discovery strengthened the same possibility. Not a random encounter, not an impulsive act. Preparation, coordination, observation. Late that evening, Lena reviewed one final archive. It contained missing person bulletins issued throughout neighboring counties during the early 1980s. She wasn't looking for Daniel. She wasn't even looking for the sedan anymore. She searched for something much simpler: descriptions of strangers. One bulletin from 1982 described an unidentified man reported repeatedly near roadside diners. The witness had written only a brief description: quiet, middle-aged, dark baseball cap, large eagle belt buckle. Lena stared silently. The same buckle. Again, the witness had never learned the man's name. Investigators at the time dismissed the report because no crime had occurred. Now it felt different. The man wasn't appearing after disappearances. He appeared before them, always waiting, always observing, always blending into the background until history finally caught up. Near midnight, Brooks returned alone to the abandoned foundation of Harris Fuel and Supply. Rain had begun falling again, tapping softly against the hood of his truck. Standing among broken concrete and rusted pipes, he tried to imagine the truck stop as it had once been. Bright lights, coffee brewing around the clock, truck engines idling through the night, strangers arriving, strangers leaving. The perfect place for someone who wanted to watch without being remembered. The wind shifted. For a brief moment, the empty foundation almost seemed alive again. Brooks closed his eyes. The investigation was no longer chasing scattered clues. It was reconstructing an invisible network of ordinary places connected by one extraordinary secret. And somewhere inside that forgotten network, someone had made a mistake. A mistake so small that nobody recognized it in 1979. A mistake that had survived 45 years, waiting patiently for someone to notice. Morning broke beneath a blanket of thick fog that settled over Blackridge County. swallowing fence lines, empty fields, and the narrow roads that wound through surrounding forest. Visibility dropped to barely 100 yards, transforming familiar places into shadows. Sheriff Ethan Brooks drove slowly toward the courthouse, replaying every discovery from the previous weeks. The investigation had uncovered patterns. It had uncovered witnesses. It had uncovered forgotten photographs. What it still lacked was one undeniable connection capable of bringing every fragment together. Cold cases rarely yielded dramatic breakthroughs. They surrendered piece by piece. Inside the evidence room, Detective Lena Ortiz pinned another county map to the wall. This one wasn't marked with disappearances. It was marked with payphones. Brooks looked puzzled. Why payphones? Lena slid a stack of archived telephone company records across the table. In the late 70s, long-distance calls from roadside payphones were logged for billing purposes. Brooks immediately understood. If two people were coordinating, they couldn't rely on cell phones that didn't exist. Lena nodded. They would have needed predictable communication. The analyst compared every known location connected to the investigation with the locations of public telephones operating in 1979. The overlap was striking. Roadside cafes, truck stops, gas stations. Nearly every place connected to the unidentified sedan also contained a public phone within walking distance. Not proof, but another pattern. Meanwhile, Owen Pierce continued examining the archived newspaper negatives. One frame that had previously appeared useless caught his attention. The image was blurred beyond recognition. A photographer had apparently moved the camera while pressing the shutter. Most investigators would have discarded it. Owen did the opposite. He enlarged it, adjusted the contrast, sharpened the outlines. The result remained imperfect, but one object slowly emerged, a rectangular roadside billboard. The advertisement itself had faded into abstract shapes. The small lettering beneath it, however, became just legible enough to read. Harris Fuel and Supply, next exit. The blurred sedan appeared beneath the sign. The timestamp printed on the negative showed something remarkable. The photograph had been taken almost an hour before Daniel Mercer vanished. Earlier than anyone had believed. Brooks spread the timeline across the conference table. If this timestamp is correct. He traced a line with his finger. Then whoever drove that sedan wasn't reacting. They were already in position. The room fell silent. Preparation. Again, every major discovery continued pointing toward planning rather than coincidence. That afternoon, another unexpected visitor arrived. His name was Arthur Sloan, 83 years old, retired volunteer firefighter. He apologized before sitting down. I didn't think it mattered. Brooks had heard those words many times. Sometimes they led nowhere. Sometimes they changed everything. Arthur explained that his crew had assisted with the original search in 1979. Most memories had faded. One hadn't. The flashlight. Brooks looked up. What flashlight? Arthur frowned. One of our volunteers found a heavy-duty flashlight near the old logging road. It wasn't logged. Arthur shook his head. No. Why not? We thought it belonged to one of us. Brooks felt his stomach tighten. What happened to it? Arthur sighed. I kept it. The room became perfectly still. Arthur explained that the flashlight had remained in the toolbox of his pickup for years before eventually being stored in his garage. He had never considered it evidence. Never imagined it might matter. I almost threw it away last month. Instead, he had brought it. The flashlight rested inside a faded paper bag. Scratched. Weathered. Still bearing dried mud trapped inside the grooves of its metal casing. Modern forensic science couldn't erase 45 years. But sometimes, it could still recover history. The laboratory handled the flashlight with extraordinary care. Technicians photographed every surface, collected microscopic debris, examined layers of corrosion. The batteries had long since leaked beyond recognition. No fingerprints remained. Then a trace evidence examiner noticed something lodged beneath the tail cap. Tiny fibers, almost invisible, blue wool. Not enough to identify a garment, but enough to compare. Investigators searched preserved evidence from Daniel Mercer's abandoned truck. Inside an archive property envelope rested a torn fragment recovered from the driver's seat in 1979. Blue wool. The laboratory compared both samples. Hours later, the report arrived. The fibers were visually and chemically consistent, not conclusive, not unique, but consistent. Brooks smiled for the first time in days. Another quiet connection. Another piece refusing to contradict the others. Late that evening, Lena reviewed Arthur Sloan's original volunteer roster. Dozens of names appeared. Most had already passed away. One name caught her attention. Jacob Nolan, search volunteer. Never interviewed. No witness statement. Nothing beyond a signature. She searched public records. Jacob was still alive, living less than 30 miles away. Brooks closed the folder. Tomorrow. The following morning they drove through winding county roads until they reached a modest farmhouse surrounded by aging oak trees. Jacob Nolan answered the door slowly. He listened patiently as Brooks explained the reason for the visit. At first, the elderly man simply shook his head. I don't remember much. Then Brooks mentioned the flashlight. Jacob looked away. For a long moment, neither detective spoke. Finally, Jacob exhaled. There was something. What? We heard engines. Brooks leaned forward. How many? 2. Jacob closed his eyes. I thought one belonged to the search team. But they drove away before we reached the road. Did you see them? No, only headlights. Were they together? Jacob nodded slowly. They left within seconds of each other. The statement wasn't dramatic. It wasn't definitive. Yet it echoed the horn sequence, the cafe witness, the railroad worker, the recovered audio. Again and again, independent memories supported the same possibility. 2 vehicles, not one. As Brooks and Lena drove back toward Blackridge, neither spoke for several miles. The investigation was changing shape once again. It no longer revolved around a mysterious sedan alone. It revolved around coordination, signals, timing, movement. Somewhere, hidden inside decades of forgotten paperwork and fading memories, lay the identity of the second vehicle. And Brooks had the unmistakable feeling that once they found it, the entire mystery surrounding Hollow Creek Road would finally begin to make sense. The investigation reached a point where every new discovery seemed to confirm the last. 2 vehicles, repeated signals, carefully chosen locations, patient observation. None of it proved who had taken Daniel Mercer. But together, the pieces suggested something investigators in 1979 had never imagined. The disappearance had likely been part of a carefully coordinated plan rather than a spontaneous act. Sheriff Ethan Brooks knew that patterns alone were not enough. He needed something tangible, something that could survive scrutiny, something that existed outside fading memories. The following week, the Blackridge Sheriff's Office partnered with the State University's Archival Imaging Laboratory. The laboratory specialized in restoring deteriorated photographs, maps, and handwritten documents. Boxes of forgotten evidence arrived one after another. Negatives, road surveys, volunteer search logs, county engineering maps. Among them was a large aerial photograph taken by the Department of Agriculture only 12 days after Daniel Mercer disappeared. The image had originally been created to evaluate crop conditions. No investigator had ever considered it evidence. Brooks spread the oversized print across a conference table. Thousands of acres of farmland stretched across the photograph. Roads appeared as thin gray lines. Farmhouses looked like tiny white squares. At first glance, nothing seemed remarkable. Then Owen Pierce overlaid the aerial image with a historical map of the now-vanished logging road. Several narrow clearings appeared in the forest, exactly where the old route once existed. One clearing stood out. Unlike the others, it showed signs of recent vehicle activity. Parallel tire tracks entered. Only one visible route exited. Brooks stared at the image. If this was taken 12 days later. Those tracks lasted nearly 2 weeks. Ground conditions in August had been unusually dry. Without rain, impressions could remain visible much longer than investigators expected. No one had searched that clearing. No one had even known it existed. The realization frustrated everyone in the room, not because someone had failed, because no one had possessed the information needed to look there. Brooks requested modern satellite imagery. The clearing had disappeared decades earlier. Young pine trees now covered every inch of ground. Nature had erased almost every trace of human activity. Almost. A faint depression remained visible beneath the tree canopy. An old access path, barely noticeable unless someone knew exactly where to look. The sheriff organized a field survey. No dramatic excavation. No heavy machinery. Only careful observation. The team followed the abandoned logging route using historical coordinates. Branches scratched against their jackets as they moved deeper into the forest. 45 years of growth transformed familiar landmarks into unrecognizable wilderness. Finally, Owen stopped. There, a shallow rise interrupted the otherwise level forest floor. Nearby stood several unnaturally straight rows of younger pine trees, different species from the surrounding forest, different age. Lena knelt to examine the soil. This area was disturbed. Years ago. Brooks nodded. Maybe decades. They documented everything. Measurements, photographs, GPS coordinates. No assumptions, no speculation, only facts. A forensic archaeologist joined the investigation the following day. Instead of digging immediately, she conducted a non-invasive survey using ground-penetrating radar. The equipment slowly crossed the clearing. Most readings showed ordinary layers of soil and roots. Then one section produced an irregular reflection several feet below the surface. Not a body, not a vehicle, simply a disturbance inconsistent with the surrounding terrain. The archaeologist looked toward Brooks. Something happened here. What? I can't say. But this ground wasn't left untouched. Permission for a controlled excavation required several days. While legal paperwork moved through the courts, Brooks focused on another question. If two vehicles had entered the forest, why had witnesses remembered only one leaving? Jacob Nolan's statement replayed constantly in his mind. Two engines, headlights, leaving within seconds. But memories from stressful situations could be unreliable. Brooks revisited every interview conducted during the original search. Buried within an officer's handwritten notebook, he found a sentence that had never appeared in the official report. Volunteer believes another vehicle may have passed earlier, but unsure direction. No follow-up interview. No additional questions. Nothing. Not because investigators were careless. Because the comment had seemed too uncertain to matter. Now uncertainty itself had become valuable. Meanwhile, Lena traveled to the county records office to review insurance claims filed during the late 1970s. She wasn't looking for disappearances. She was looking for damaged vehicles, particularly those repaired shortly after August 1979. Most files had long since been destroyed. One survived. A claim describing rear-end damage to an older pickup truck repaired in September 1979. The owner's name had been partially obscured by water damage. Only the surname remained readable. Hawthorne. The first name was gone. The address incomplete. Still, it was the first documented pickup truck connected to the same time period. The same type of vehicle investigators believed had answered the mysterious horn signal. Back in Blackridge, Brooks received another surprise. Arthur Sloan called the sheriff's office. I remembered something else. Brooks drove to Arthur's home immediately. The elderly firefighter retrieved a faded notebook from a dresser drawer. I used to sketch search areas. Simple pencil drawings filled the pages. Trees, creeks, fence lines. Then one rough sketch showed something unexpected. Two sets of tire tracks crossing near the abandoned logging road. Arthur pointed toward them. I always thought one belonged to us. What changed your mind? Arthur looked down. Our trucks used different tires. Brooks examined the drawing carefully. The tread patterns were clearly different. Arthur hadn't realized their significance in 1979. Now, the sketch supported Jacob Nolan's memory. Two vehicles. Again, that evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills surrounding Blackridge County, Brooks stood alone outside the sheriff's office. 45 years earlier, investigators had searched desperately for one missing man. Now the case had expanded into something far more complex. Forgotten photographs, hidden roads, 2 vehicles, silent signals, a witness who waited nearly half a century before speaking. Every discovery pointed toward a carefully orchestrated sequence of events that had remained invisible simply because no single person had possessed every piece. Tomorrow, the excavation would begin. Brooks had no expectation of discovering a miracle beneath the forest floor. But sometimes they offered something better. One more answer. And one more answer was often enough to reveal the truth hidden behind decades of silence. Dawn arrived beneath heavy clouds. A thin layer of mist drifted between the towering pines surrounding the abandoned logging road, softening every outline until forest seemed suspended between past and present. Sheriff Ethan Brooks stepped over fallen branches as members of the forensic archaeology team unloaded their equipment. No one spoke louder than necessary. Even after 45 years, the place carried an unusual stillness. Not because anyone believed the forest itself held secrets, because everyone understood that history sometimes waited beneath ordinary ground. The excavation began slowly. Every square meter was photographed before a single shovel entered the soil. Layers of leaves were removed by hand. Roots were documented. Soil color changed gradually from dark brown to pale clay. Hours passed with nothing unusual. Then one archaeologist raised her hand. Stop. The entire team froze. A narrow strip of compacted gravel emerged beneath the soil. It wasn't natural. Brooks crouched beside it. What do you think? The archaeologist brushed away another thin layer of earth. This isn't a burial. It looks like an old road surface. The forgotten logging route. Exactly where the historical maps had placed it. For decades, the forest had hidden the road beneath layers of vegetation. Now, for the first time since the early 1980s, part of it saw daylight again. Ground-penetrating radar had indicated an irregular feature several feet below the surface. The gravel road explained part of the anomaly, not all of it. The survey continued. Near the edge of the clearing, another area produced stronger reflections. Carefully, investigators expanded the excavation. Broken branches, old rusted wire, fragments of weathered timber. Nothing directly connected to Daniel Mercer. Then Lena noticed something lying half embedded beneath compacted soil. A piece of glass. Not a bottle. A vehicle headlight lens. The plastic carried a manufacturer's marking still faintly visible beneath decades of dirt. The fragment was carefully packaged for laboratory examination. Could it belong to the unidentified sedan? No one knew, but it proved one undeniable fact. At least one vehicle had been damaged somewhere near the clearing. Back at the laboratory, automotive historians compared the lens fragment with manufacturer catalogs. Several days later, they narrowed the possibilities. The headlight design had been used on only 3 American sedan models produced between 1976 and 1979. One of them matched witness descriptions almost perfectly. An older dark sedan. Brooks stared at the report. It wasn't identification. It wasn't ownership. It simply reduced possibilities. Still, every reduction mattered. Meanwhile, Owen Pierce revisited something everyone else had overlooked. The old cassette tape. Not the voices. Not the horn signals. The silence. He measured the precise intervals between sounds. 3 horn blasts. 7 seconds. A second engine. 23 seconds. Another distant engine noise. The timing seemed oddly consistent. He overlaid those intervals onto a map of the logging road. Assuming normal vehicle speeds, 2 cars separated by several hundred yards could produce almost exactly the sequence recorded on the tape. It fits, Owen said quietly. Lena looked at the diagram. They weren't together. No, they were spaced apart. Like checkpoints. The realization unsettled everyone. If correct, the drivers weren't improvising. They were following a plan. That afternoon, Brooks received another call. This one came from the daughter of a former county mechanic. My father passed away years ago, she explained. We're cleaning out his garage. I found something with your department's name written on it. Inside an old filing cabinet rested dozens of repair invoices. Most had nothing to do with the investigation. One did. The invoice described emergency, repairs performed in late August 1979. Customer requested immediate replacement of a damaged headlight assembly. Vehicle color, dark blue. Brooks read the invoice twice. The customer's signature had faded. The vehicle identification number was incomplete, but the timing aligned almost perfectly with Daniel Mercer's disappearance. And the repaired component matched the type of headlight lens recovered from the forest. The mechanic's handwritten note included one additional observation. Customer insisted old broken lens be discarded immediately. An ordinary instruction. Yet investigators wondered, why insist? Most customers never cared what happened to broken parts. Brooks placed a repair invoice beside the recovered headlight fragment. The evidence still couldn't identify a driver, but the timeline grew tighter. The unknown sedan may have suffered damage shortly after the disappearance. Someone repaired it quickly. Someone wanted it back on the road. Late that evening, the forensic archaeologist approached Brooks. We found something else. She handed him a small evidence bag. Inside rested a rusted metal button. Plain, round, almost featureless beneath corrosion. Laboratory cleaning revealed a faint embossed design. An eagle, its wings stretched outward. Brooks looked up slowly. The eagle belt buckle. Now an eagle button. Were they connected? No one could say. Perhaps coincidence. Perhaps not. Yet the symbol had now appeared in photographs, witness descriptions, and physical evidence. Again and again, like a quiet signature left behind, without anyone realizing it. As darkness settled over the forest, Brooks stood beside the exposed section of the old logging road. 45 years earlier, tires had crossed this gravel. Engines had echoed beneath these same trees. Someone had waited. Someone had signaled. Someone had disappeared. Now the forest was beginning to return what it had hidden, not all at once, but piece by piece. The investigation still lacked names. It still lacked certainty. But with every recovered fragment, every forgotten document, and every witness brave enough to remember, the silence surrounding Hollow Creek Road grew just a little quieter. And Brooks couldn't shake one thought. If the unknown driver repaired his damaged sedan only days after that August night, then somewhere, perhaps buried inside another forgotten archive, there might still be a record of who he was. The repair invoice became the center of the investigation. For the first time in nearly half a century, detectives possessed a document tied not to memory, but to an event that occurred within days of Daniel Mercer's disappearance. It was incomplete, damaged by time, and missing the customer's full identity, yet it represented something every cold case investigator hopes to find. A record created before anyone knew a crime had occurred. Those records rarely lied. Sheriff Ethan Brooks and Detective Lena Ortiz drove to the state archives, where decades of vehicle registration microfilm had recently been restored as part of a preservation project. Most investigators assumed the records from the late 1970s had been destroyed. Most had. Some hadn't. Thousands of registration cards filled row after row of metal cabinets. Every card contained only basic information: owner, address, vehicle identification number, color. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could solve a mystery on its own. But Brooks wasn't searching for a name. He was searching for a fragment. The repair invoice preserved only the final 6 characters of the vehicle identification number. 6 characters were enough to eliminate thousands of possibilities. Hour after hour, they compared faded registration cards. Blue sedan. Wrong number. Blue sedan. Wrong manufacturer. Blue sedan. Wrong year. Late in the afternoon, Lena suddenly stopped turning pages. This one. Brooks leaned closer. The final 6 VIN characters matched perfectly. The vehicle was registered to a small construction company operating 2 counties west of Black Ridge. The company no longer existed. It had dissolved in 1984. Still, employment records survived. 5 men had driven company vehicles. Only one regularly used the blue sedan. His name was Richard Hawthorne. Brooks remained silent. The surname matched the damage insurance record discovered weeks earlier. Not proof, But another connection. Investigators immediately began reconstructing Hawthorne's life. Born in 1943, Army veteran, construction foreman, no serious criminal record, no known arrests. Neighbors describe him as polite, quiet, dependable. The kind of man who waved while mowing his lawn. Exactly the kind of person who disappeared into ordinary life. One detail stood apart. Between 1978 and 1982, Hawthorne's work assignments repeatedly placed him near Blackridge County, near Hollow Creek Road, near Harris Fuel and Supply, near the forgotten logging route. The timeline tightened once again. Brooks refused a rush. Cold cases had been destroyed before by investigators falling in love with convenient theories. Every connection had survived independent verification. He requested payroll records, construction contracts, fuel receipts, old motel registrations, anything capable of placing Hawthorne independently within the region. The documents arrived over several days. None proved involvement in Daniel Mercer's disappearance. All confirmed one thing. Richard Hawthorne had traveled extensively throughout the exact counties connected to the investigation. Again, pattern, not certainty. Pattern. Meanwhile, forensic analysts completed microscopic examination of the recovered headlight lens. The fracture edges revealed fresh impact damage at the time it broke. Not weathering, not gradual deterioration. A collision, minor, but recent when it entered the soil. Brooks unfolded a county map. If Hawthorne repaired his headlight after August 18th, he looked toward Lena. Where did it break? She answered quietly, maybe right here. She pointed toward the excavation site. Another witness emerged unexpectedly. Margaret Ellis, now 81, contacted investigators after recognizing Harris Fuel and Supply in a newspaper article. She had worked there briefly during the summer of 1979. Most memories had faded. One hadn't. The blue sedan. Brooks asked what she remembered. It came in almost every Friday. The same driver? I think so. What did he buy? She frowned. Coffee. Sometimes gasoline. Sometimes nothing. What do you mean? He'd park. Watch the highway. Then leave. Never eating. Never talking. Always watching. Brooks asked the question that mattered most. Did he ever meet anyone? Margaret hesitated. I saw another truck once. What kind? A light-colored pickup. Did the driver speak? I couldn't hear them. But... She closed her eyes. They looked like they already knew each other. The investigation board changed again. Now the unidentified second vehicle became slightly clearer. Not merely a pickup. A light-colored pickup. Combined with Arthur Sloan's sketch. Jacob Nolan's memory. The audio recording, the horn signals, the theory of coordinated movement became increasingly difficult to dismiss. Owen Pierce continued examining Hawthorne's employment records. One handwritten expense report contained something almost absurdly ordinary. Replacement work gloves, flashlight batteries, fuel, coffee, nothing remarkable, except the date. August 20th, 1979. 2 days after Daniel Mercer disappeared. Brooks stared at the receipt. Flashlight batteries. Arthur Sloan had unknowingly kept an old flashlight found near the logging road. The batteries inside had leaked decades earlier. No one could prove they were the same. Yet the coincidence was impossible to ignore. Late that evening, Brooks drove alone past the remains of Harris Fuel and Supply. The empty foundation reflected moonlight through puddles left by recent rain. He imagined truck engines rumbling across the gravel lot, travelers stopping for coffee, conversations lasting only minutes, a blue sedan waiting quietly near the edge of the property, invisible because nothing about it demanded attention. Cold cases rarely remained unsolved because criminals were brilliant. Most survived because ordinary moments never seem important until years later. A waitress remembering untouched coffee, a volunteer keeping an old flashlight, a mechanic saving an invoice, a witness recalling 3 horn blasts drifting across the darkness. Individually, meaningless. Together, they were beginning to tell a story. Not the whole story. Not yet. But enough for Brooks to believe that somewhere beyond the paperwork, beyond the photographs, and beyond the fading memories, another person still existed. Someone who had shared that road with Richard Hawthorne. Someone who had answered the signal. Someone whose identity remained hidden behind 45 years of silence. And finding that second driver, Brooks believed, might finally explain everything that happened on Hollow Creek Road the night Daniel Mercer vanished. Rain fell steadily throughout the night, washing across the empty roads of Blackridge County and turning the exposed earth at the excavation site into dark, sticky clay. Sheriff Ethan Brooks arrived before sunrise, coffee in hand, watching members of the forensic team cover the open trench with heavy tarps. The weather had halted the excavation. The investigation, however, refused to slow down. Inside the sheriff's office, every new discovery now pointed toward the same conclusion. Richard Hawthorne had become the strongest person of interest the task force had ever identified. But one question remained unanswered. Who drove the second vehicle? Detective Lena Ortiz believed the answer might exist somewhere no one had thought to search. Not in police archives. Not in court records. Insurance files. During the late 1970s, many commercial insurers required drivers involved in even minor roadside incidents to complete handwritten reports describing where they had been traveling and why. Thousands of those records had survived inside a regional warehouse awaiting digitization. Most investigators considered them useless. Lena disagreed. If Hawthorne's sedan had truly suffered front-end damage shortly after Daniel Mercer's disappearance, there was always a possibility that another vehicle involved in the same journey had filed paperwork of its own. Days later, dozens of cardboard boxes arrived at the State Record Center. Page after page documented broken windshields, dented bumpers, damaged mirrors, and mechanical failures. Most had absolutely nothing to do with Blackridge County. Then Owen Pierce paused over a thin folder dated September 1979. The report involved a light-colored pickup. Minor damage. Driver stated that the vehicle struck a fallen tree limb on an old county road during heavy fog. Location listed: County Road 14. Brooks unfolded a historical map. County Road 14 connected directly to the abandoned logging route. Not proof. Another coincidence. Yet every coincidence continued pointing toward the same forgotten roads. The insurance report contained only a partial name: Thomas R. The remaining section had been destroyed by water years earlier. Still, another detail survived. Occupation: independent livestock transporter. Lena searched agricultural licensing records from the period. Only 4 independent livestock transporters named Thomas operated within the surrounding counties. One stood out: Thomas Rollins. His delivery routes regularly crossed Blackridge. Fuel receipts placed him near Harris Fuel and Supply on multiple occasions during the summer of 1979. Brooks leaned back in his chair. The second vehicle finally had a possible driver. No one celebrated. Experience had taught everyone on the task force that possibilities were fragile. Brooks wanted independent confirmation. He instructed Owen to compare Rollins' travel records with Hawthorne construction schedules. Hours later, 2 transparent overlays covered the county map: construction sites, livestock deliveries. The routes intersected repeatedly: truck stop, county fairgrounds, old highway junctions, and, on 3 documented occasions, Harris Fuel and Supply. The overlap was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, forensic analysts completed another examination of the recovered eagle-shaped button. Microscopic cleaning revealed traces of dark blue thread still attached to the underside. Not enough for DNA. Not enough to identify a garment. Enough to determine that the button had likely been sewn onto a heavy work jacket. Eleanor Whitmore immediately remembered something. The man in the cafe. Brooks looked toward her. He wore a dark jacket. She nodded, even though it was warm outside. The button didn't identify him. But once again, an old memory quietly aligned with physical evidence. The excavation resumed as soon as the rain stopped. This time investigators expanded the search beyond the original clearing. Near the edge of the forgotten road, one archaeologist uncovered a shallow drainage ditch buried beneath decades of leaves and soil. Inside lay scattered fragments of rusted metal. Automotive specialists examined them on site. Most belonged to ordinary farm equipment. One piece did not. It matched the mounting bracket for a sedan headlight assembly manufactured between 1976 and 1979. The broken headlight lens recovered days earlier would have attached directly to it. Brooks stood silently beside the evidence marker. The unknown sedan had almost certainly been here, not somewhere nearby. Here, late that afternoon, another unexpected lead arrived. A retired telephone company employee responded to the department's renewed public appeal. His name was Victor Hale. For nearly 30 years, he had maintained roadside pay phones throughout the county. I remembered something strange, he told investigators. What? There used to be a pay phone behind Harris Fuel and Supply. Brooks nodded. We know. Victor smiled faintly. No, you don't. He reached into an old folder and removed a faded maintenance log. Repeated repair requests appeared beside the same telephone number. Reason: receiver left off the hook for extended periods. Dates: August 1979, September 1979, October 1979. Brooks frowned. Why would someone do that? Victor shrugged. Happens sometimes. But usually by accident. He tapped one particular entry. This one happened 4 nights in a row. Someone had intentionally disabled the phone, or someone had been waiting beside it. Photographs, maps, repair invoices, insurance reports, telephone logs. Every new discovery added another layer to a picture that had remained invisible for 45 years. Richard Hawthorne, Thomas Rollins, a blue sedan, a light-colored pickup, 3 horn blasts, a forgotten logging road, an abandoned truck stop, a damaged headlight, an eagle-shaped button. Each clue alone remained incomplete. Together, they formed something investigators had never possessed before, a coherent narrative built from independent pieces of history. Still, one question continued to haunt Brooks. If Hawthorne and Rollins truly traveled those roads together, why had neither man's name ever surfaced during the original investigation? The answer, he suspected, lay not in what the witnesses had seen, but in what someone had deliberately chosen never to tell. The case file had grown from a single weathered folder into an entire wall of evidence. Maps covered one side of the operations room. Photographs filled another. Colored strings connected witness statements, repair invoices, historical records, forensic reports, and faded newspaper clippings. Every new discovery had strengthened the same theory. Richard Hawthorne, Thomas Rollins, a blue sedan, a light-colored pickup. Yet theories were not enough. Sheriff Ethan Brooks needed one final connection that existed independently of memory. Something no witness could accidentally misremember. The breakthrough arrived from an unexpected source. The state archives completed the digitization of several thousand reels of local television news footage recorded during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Most broadcasts documented county fairs, political speeches, weather reports, and high school football games. Nothing investigators expected to matter. Still, Brooks requested copies covering the weeks surrounding Daniel Mercer's disappearance. Hours of grainy video flickered across a monitor. Parades, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, harvest celebrations. Then, a reporter interviewed visitors outside the Blackridge County Fair. People walked behind a camera carrying balloons, food, and souvenirs. Most passed unnoticed. One vehicle did not. Parked along the edge of the frame sat a dark blue sedan. The rear bumper carried a crescent-shaped dent. Brooks paused the footage. There, the video quality was poor. Faces remained indistinct. But unlike still photographs, moving images reveal behavior. A man approached the sedan. He opened the driver's door, stopped, looked carefully in both directions before entering. The movement lasted only seconds. Yet Brooks noticed something subtle. The man wasn't checking for traffic. He was checking whether anyone was watching him. The laboratory enhanced the footage frame by frame. No miracle occurred. The driver's face remained too blurred for identification. One detail became sharper. The eagle-shaped belt buckle reflected sunlight as the man climbed inside. Again, The same unmistakable symbol. Independent evidence. Another year. Another source. Meanwhile, Detective Lena Ortiz pursued Thomas Rollins. Rollins had died in 2008. His surviving daughter welcomed investigators into her home. She knew almost nothing about the Hollow Creek investigation. Her father rarely discussed work. He spent most of his life driving. She disappeared into the attic and returned carrying several cardboard boxes. These belonged to Dad. Inside were logbooks, fuel receipts, delivery schedules, photographs. Brooks carefully turned each page. Then he stopped. One receipt from August 1979 listed fuel purchased at Harris Fuel and Supply. Nothing unusual, except the handwritten note at the bottom. Met RH after dark. Only 3 words. Only initials. Yet Brooks immediately recognized them. Richard Hawthorne. The daughter looked puzzled. Does that mean something? Brooks answered honestly. It might. The initials alone proved nothing. Business associates often met after work. Friends shared coffee. Travelers crossed paths. Still, the note independently linked the 2 men whose names had gradually emerged from entirely separate records. The investigation finally possessed evidence suggesting they actually knew one another. Back in Blackridge, Owen Pierce focused on the cassette, recording one final time. Technology had improved even during the course of the investigation. Using newly available enhancement software, technicians isolated background frequencies previously hidden beneath static. Most of the recovered sounds were meaningless. Wind, insects, vehicle engines, then a distant train whistle. Brooks looked confused. So, Owen smiled. Train schedules. Freight rail companies maintain precise departure records. If investigators identified the exact train heard on a recording, they could establish an even more accurate timeline. Railway archives confirmed that only one freight train passed the Hollow Creek crossing within the relevant time window. Its engineer recorded passing the crossing at 8:41 p.m. That timestamp synchronized almost perfectly with Eleanor Whitmore's account. The unidentified man had left the cafe minutes earlier. Daniel Mercer was believed to have disappeared shortly afterward. For the first time, investigators possess an independently verified timeline built from physical records rather than estimates. Minute by minute, the night became clearer. As autumn settled over Blackridge County, the investigation entered its 49th week. Brooks sometimes wondered how detectives in 1979 had endured years without answers. He now understood. Cold cases were exhausting because every answer created 2 new questions. Every solved mystery exposed another hidden corner. Late one evening, Brooks received a call from the forensic laboratory. The recovered headlight bracket had yielded an unexpected result. Tiny traces of old automotive paint remained trapped beneath corrosion. Laboratory analysis identified the color, dark metallic blue. The same factory paint used on Richard Hawthorne Construction Company sedan. Not exclusive, not unique, but entirely consistent. Again, the evidence never shouted. It whispered, always the same direction, always the same story. Brooks stood alone inside the evidence room after everyone else had gone home. He looked at Daniel Mercer's smiling photograph pinned near the center of the board. 45 years earlier, one family had lost a husband and father without explanation. Now, through forgotten witnesses, abandoned records, overlooked photographs, and modern forensic science, the silence surrounding that night had begun to fracture. Not because of one dramatic confession, not because of one miraculous clue, but because hundreds of ordinary details, ignored for decades, had finally found one another. Only one chapter remained unfinished. Brooks believed the investigation was now close enough to the truth that history itself was beginning to resist being forgotten. Somewhere beyond the remaining unanswered questions, one final witness, or one final document, was waiting to complete the story. Winter arrived early in Blackridge County. A hard frost covered the fields before sunrise, leaving every fence post and tree branch coated in white. The forest surrounding the abandoned logging road stood silent beneath a pale gray sky, its familiar sounds replaced by the slow crack of ice forming along Hollow Creek. Inside the sheriff's office, however, silence had disappeared. For nearly a year, the investigation had gathered momentum piece by piece. Witnesses had emerged from decades of fear. Forgotten photographs had resurfaced. Historical documents had aligned with modern forensic analysis. The mystery was no longer hidden. It was narrowing. Sheriff Ethan Brooks could feel it. The State Forensic Laboratory completed its comprehensive review of every physical item recovered during the excavation. Most objects revealed nothing new. Corroded metal fragments, weathered glass, pieces of rusted fencing. Then the final report arrived. Among the soil collected beneath the old road surface, analysts identified microscopic particles of industrial concrete dust. Not ordinary gravel, not local limestone. Concrete dust commonly produced during bridge construction. Brooks immediately thought of Richard Hawthorne, construction foreman. He requested every archive project completed by Hawthorne's company between 1978 and 1980. 3 bridge repairs appeared on the list. One project stood out, a temporary bridge replacement, less than 15 miles from Harris Fuel and Supply. Construction had begun only weeks before Daniel Mercer disappeared. Detective Lena Ortiz drove to the old bridge. Modern traffic crossed a newer structure built decades earlier. The original construction site barely existed. Only fragments of the old access road remained visible beyond thick undergrowth. An elderly fisherman watched her examine the area. "You looking for the old bridge crew?" Lena looked surprised. "You remember them?" He nodded. "They were here all summer." "Do you remember anyone in particular?" One fellow drove a blue sedan. Lena felt her pulse quicken. "What else?" The fisherman smiled faintly. He never liked parking with the others. He always left his car by itself. Again, separate, watching, never fully joining the crowd. Back in Blackridge, Owen Pierce completed a digital reconstruction of the final hours before Daniel Mercer disappeared. Using every verified timestamp, he created a minute-by-minute sequence. 8:17 p.m. The unidentified man remained inside the cafe. 8:41 p.m. The freight train passed a crossing. Moments later, 3 horn blasts. A second engine. Daniel Mercer traveling toward Hollow Creek Road. The sequence fit remarkably well. Not perfectly. History rarely allowed perfection, but well enough that independent evidence supported nearly every major event. Brooks stared at the animated timeline. It wasn't chaos. Owen nodded. It was choreography. Another surprise arrived from the state archives. During restoration of several damaged courthouse boxes, archivists uncovered forgotten envelope mistakenly filed inside tax records. The envelope contained photographs taken by a county insurance investigator after a minor traffic accident in late August 1979. The accident itself had nothing to do with Daniel Mercer. One photograph did. Parked behind a damaged vehicle, waiting for traffic to clear, sat a familiar blue sedan. The rear bumper, the crescent-shaped dent, visible once again. More importantly, the front left headlight appeared brand new. Brooks compared the date. 5 days after Daniel Mercer vanished. Exactly consistent with the repair invoice. The damaged headlight had already been replaced. Lena noticed another detail. The sedan wasn't alone. Several car lengths behind it sat a light-colored pickup. The image quality prevented identification. License plates remained unreadable. Still, the 2 vehicles appeared together. Independent confirmation. Months of investigation had suggested Hawthorne and Rollins traveled the same roads. Now, for the first time, a photograph placed vehicles matching both descriptions within the same frame. Not proof of conspiracy, but proof that the theory deserved to be taken seriously. Brooks contacted Thomas Rollins' surviving daughter once again. This time she remembered something she had previously dismissed. "My father hated photographs." "What do you mean?" "He almost never let anyone take his picture. Except once." She disappeared into another room before returning with an old family album. Inside rested dozens of faded snapshots. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, camping trips, Then one image stopped Brooks cold. Thomas Rollins stood beside a pickup truck. Next to him, another man. The face remained partly hidden beneath the brim of a baseball cap. The image was too blurred for positive identification. Yet one object reflected the afternoon sunlight, an eagle-shaped belt buckle. Brooks slowly lowered the photograph. The symbol had returned. Again, the investigation team gathered late that evening. No one claimed the case had been solved. Too many questions remained unanswered. No confession, no direct eyewitness, no definitiva forensica identificación. Yet everyone recognized the transformation that had taken place. 45 years earlier, investigators possessed almost nothing beyond an abandoned truck and a missing man. Now, they had a reconstructed timeline. Repeated sightings of the same sedan. Independent evidence linking Richard Hawthorne and Thomas Rollins. Recovered vehicle components. Witnesses describing coordinated movements. Photographs spanning multiple years. And a forgotten witness whose courage had reopened history itself. Brooks looked around the room. We're close. No one disagreed. Outside, snow began falling across Blackridge County, covering roads, rooftops, and empty fields with a fresh layer of white. Nature had spent decades trying to bury the past beneath seasons of rain, wind, and growing forests. But memory had proven more stubborn, and somewhere inside the last unopened box, or inside the last forgotten conversation, the final piece was still waiting to be found. Snow covered Blackridge County in silence. The abandoned logging road had disappeared once again beneath a blanket of white, hiding every trace of the excavation completed only weeks earlier. To anyone passing through, the forest looked untouched, timeless, almost peaceful. Sheriff Ethan Brooks knew better. Beneath those trees lay decades of unanswered questions. And somewhere beyond the evidence already collected, one final truth still refused to reveal itself. The investigation had now entered its second winter. Cold case task forces from neighboring counties began sharing files that had never before left local archives. Detectives who had spent entire careers chasing unrelated disappearances suddenly found themselves comparing notes with one another. Patterns continued to emerge, not because new crimes had occurred, because old investigators had preserved details that no one else realized were important. A waitress remembered an unfamiliar blue sedan. A motel owner remembered two men checking in separately, but leaving within minutes of each other. A mechanic remembered replacing a headlight. A railroad worker remembered 3 short horn blasts echoing across the valley. 45 years of forgotten memories slowly merged into one investigation. One afternoon, Owen Pierce made an unexpected discovery while reviewing aerial photographs from the early 1980s. He wasn't studying roads. He was studying buildings. Specifically, barns, storage sheds, equipment garages, any isolated structure standing near the forgotten logging route. One property caught his attention. An abandoned livestock loading facility nearly 6 miles from Hollow Creek Road. The building had been demolished in the early 1990s. Historical tax records identified its owner, Thomas Rollins. Brooks stared at the file. Rollins owned property much closer to the investigation than anyone had realized. The task force visited the site. Only a cracked concrete foundation remained. Nature had reclaimed almost everything else. The forensic archaeologist conducted another non-invasive survey. No dramatic discoveries appeared. Instead, she noticed something subtle. Deep wheel ruts preserved beneath layers of compacted soil. Not modern, old, repeated. Heavy vehicles had entered and exited the property for years. Exactly what investigators would expect from a livestock transporter. Nothing suspicious. Until Owen overlaid historical maps. The access road connected directly to the abandoned logging route without passing through Blackridge itself. Someone familiar with the back roads could travel between Rollins' property, Harris Fuel and Supply, and Hollow Creek Road while avoiding the main highway almost entirely. The route was practical, quiet, easy to overlook. Meanwhile, Detective Lena Ortiz revisited the surviving members of Daniel Mercer's family. His daughter, Emily, had been only 8 years old when her father disappeared. Now in her 50s, She had spent most of her life believing she would never know what happened. She welcomed Brooks into her home with a quiet smile. My mother used to keep everything. She opened a cedar chest tucked beneath a bedroom window. Inside rested letters, birthday card, receipts, and family photographs. Brooks carefully sorted through each item. Near the bottom of the box lay Daniel's small pocket notebook. Investigators had apparently returned it to the family decades earlier after determining it contained nothing relevant. Brooks flipped through the worn pages. Work schedules, shopping lists, telephone numbers. Then one final entry, written only 2 days before he vanished. Meeting at Harris. Asked about extra hauling job. Brooks looked up. Harris. Emily frowned. Harris Fuel and Supply? It has to be. The notebook changed everything. For years, investigators assumed Daniel had stopped near Hollow Creek by chance. Now it appeared he may have planned to meet someone connected to the truck stop, not because he suspected danger, because he believed he was discussing work. Back at headquarters, Brooks compared the notebook entry with archived employment records. Daniel occasionally accepted independent hauling contracts during harvest season, temporary work, cash payments, exactly the type of arrangement often negotiated informally at truck stops like Harris Fuel and Supply. If someone wanted to lure him to an isolated location, offering extra work would have seemed completely ordinary. No threats, no force, just opportunity. Late that evening, Owen completed another comparison. This time he analyzed fuel receipts belonging to both Richard Hawthorne and Thomas Rollins. Neither man purchased fuel consistently, yet one pattern stood out. On multiple occasions, both vehicles purchased gasoline within minutes of one another. Same location, same evening, same pump island. Independent transactions, repeated across several months. Coincidence became increasingly difficult to defend. The following morning brought another visitor. Margaret Ellis returned unexpectedly. I remembered something. Brooks immediately invited her inside. The blue sedan. She paused. It wasn't always blue. Brooks frowned. What do you mean? At night, it looked almost black. She smiled apologetically. I know that sounds silly. It doesn't, Brooks replied. Old metallic paint often appeared dramatically different beneath low light. Her observation explained why witness descriptions had varied for decades. Dork sedan, black sedan, blue sedan. Perhaps they had all been describing the same vehicle. Another contradiction quietly disappeared. That afternoon, the forensic laboratory completed restoration of one final object recovered during the excavation. The eagle-shaped button had been cleaned enough to reveal tiny manufacturing marks stamped into its reverse side. A company name. Small, nearly invisible. The button had belonged to a commercially produced work jacket sold through only a handful of regional supply stores between 1977 and 1980. One of those stores served construction companies. Another supplied commercial trucking businesses. Brooks slowly placed a report beside Hawthorne's employment records and Rollins' delivery logs. Construction, transportation. The same two worlds had crossed paths again. Night settled over Blackridge. Brooks remained alone inside the operations room, studying the evidence wall illuminated only by a single desk lamp. Daniel Mercer's notebook, the repaired headlight, the forgotten photographs, the witness statements, the horn signals, the abandoned truck stop, the blue sedan, the light-colored pickup. Every thread now converged toward the same small group of people and places. The mystery no longer felt impossible. It felt incomplete. And Brooks had learned something about incomplete stories. Sometimes they didn't end because investigators found one spectacular clue. Sometimes they ended because one ordinary piece of paper, ignored for decades, quietly explained everything that had come before. He looked toward the unopened archive box, sitting in the corner of the room. It had arrived only that afternoon from the county courthouse. No one had examined its contents yet. For reasons he couldn't explain, Brooks had the unmistakable feeling that the final chapter of the Hollow Creek mystery had already begun. The archive box had no case number, no evidence label, No indication that it belonged to the Hollow Creek investigation at all. It had been discovered during the renovation of an old courthouse storage room, tucked behind shelves filled with outdated property tax files. A handwritten note attached to the lid simply read, Miscellaneous Highway Records, 1978 to 1981. Ordinarily, no detective would have looked twice. Sheriff Ethan Brooks opened it anyway. Sometimes history hid in the places no one considered important. Inside were dozens of unrelated documents, road maintenance requests, bridge inspection reports, snow removal schedules, county engineering sketches. Nothing connected to missing persons. Nothing connected to Daniel Mercer. For nearly an hour, Brooks found nothing of value. Then a folded envelope slipped from between two engineering maps. Across the front someone had written, Harris Fuel and Supply, Access Road Survey. Brooks unfolded the contents carefully. The survey had been completed only 3 months before Daniel disappeared. County engineers had inspected secondary roads leading to the truck stop because several trucking companies requested improvements. One page immediately caught Brooks' attention. A hand-drawn map showed every legal entrance and exit surrounding Harris Fuel and Supply. One road wasn't public. It branched away behind the storage garage before disappearing into woodland. The note beside it read, Private Service Road, owner maintained. Brooks stared at the sketch. The road connected almost directly with the abandoned logging route. Detective Lena Ortiz overlaid the survey onto the historical highway maps already covering the investigation wall. The result was astonishing. Without traveling through Black Ridge, a vehicle leaving Harris Fuel and Supply could reach Hollow Creek Road in less than 12 minutes. No traffic lights, no businesses, almost no houses. Exactly the sort of route someone familiar with the area might choose if they wanted privacy. The Forgotten Service Road had never appeared on ordinary county maps, which explained why investigators in 1979 never searched it. They didn't know it existed. The following day, Brooks requested permission to inspect the former property boundaries. Although the truck stop had burned decades earlier, ownership records still identified the surrounding land. The current owner, an elderly rancher named Carl Benson, welcomed investigators. I always wondered why nobody asked about that road. Brooks looked up. You knew it was there? Carl nodded. My father owned this place after the fire. The old road was already overgrown, but you could still see where it went. He pointed toward a line of mature pine trees. It started behind the garage, crossed the creek, and disappeared into woods. Exactly as the survey suggested. Carl remembered something else. When I was a teenager, he paused, we found an old chain stretched across the entrance. A chain, heavy steel, like somebody wanted to block vehicles. What happened to it? My father cut it down. Thought hunters had put it there. Brooks exchanged a quiet glance with Lena. If the service road had eventually been blocked, someone may have wanted to discourage people from using it after the events of 1979, or perhaps long before. There was no way to know. Still, it added another piece to the puzzle. Meanwhile, Owen Pierce completed a reconstruction using every verified road available in 1979. He entered vehicle speeds consistent with gravel roads, travel times, witness observations, train schedules. The computer generated several possible routes. Only one matched every independently verified timestamp. The route began near Harris Fuel and Supply, continued along the private service road, merged with the abandoned logging road, reached Hollow Creek Road moments before Daniel Mercer disappeared. Brooks studied the animation. Every major clue aligned, not perfectly, but convincingly. The timeline no longer required impossible assumptions. It fit the landscape that actually existed in 1979. Late that afternoon, another small discovery emerged. The county archives located payroll records from Hawthorne's construction company that investigators had believed lost forever. Most pages documented ordinary work assignments. One line stood out. Richard Hawthorne had been absent from work on the morning of August 19, 1979. Reason listed, personal business. Nothing more. Construction supervisors rarely documented explanations in detail. Still, the timing was difficult to ignore. Brooks never allowed himself to mistake coincidence for proof. Instead, he searched for independent confirmation. Thomas Rollins' delivery log contained no scheduled livestock transport that same morning. 2 men, both unexpectedly unavailable less than 24 hours after Daniel Mercer vanished. Another coincidence, perhaps, or another thread woven into the same story. As darkness settled over Blackridge County, Brooks returned alone to Hollow Creek Road. Snow covered the ground once more, muting every sound except the slow movement of wind through the pines. He walked the approximate route investigators believed the blue sedan had traveled, the private service road, the forgotten logging trail, the gravel turnout. Standing there, he finally understood why the mystery had endured for so long. The landscape itself had changed. Roads disappeared. Businesses burned. Witnesses grew old. Memories faded. The truth hadn't simply been hidden by people. It had been buried by time. Before leaving, Brooks stopped beside the weathered roadside marker where Daniel Mercer's abandoned truck had been discovered 45 years earlier. He looked into the darkness beyond the trees. The investigation had reached a remarkable point. It had reconstructed forgotten roads, identified likely vehicles, linked witnesses separated by decades, recovered overlooked physical evidence, and uncovered relationships that no one in 1979 realized existed. Only one question remained, not who investigators suspected, not where the vehicles traveled, but why, what had brought Daniel Mercer to Hollow Creek Road that night. What conversation had he expected to have? What had changed in those final minutes? Somewhere, Brooks believed the answer already existed, not in the forest, not beneath the soil, but inside one final forgotten record still waiting to be recognized. And if that record survived, the silence that had surrounded Blackridge County for nearly half a century would finally come to an end.